Welcome to the Road to Inclusion podcast from the Atlas Alliance. My name is Gagan Shabra. I'm the project manager for inclusion at the Atlas Alliance, and I will be your host. And in this podcast series, we will cover themes such as disability rights, disability inclusion, the empowerment of persons with disabilities, inclusive international development aid, and disability inclusive humanitarian action. Welcome to a new episode of the podcast Road to Inclusion. I'm your host, Gagan Shabra, the project manager of inclusion at the Atlas Alliance. And today we have an excellent guest. She is not from Norway. She's coming from Denmark. Her name is Mette Møller Christensen, and she's the head of the international development at DPOD, the Disabled People's Organization in Denmark. Mette, welcome.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Great, absolutely. So, Mette, we're going to talk about many exciting things. We're going to talk about your life, your trajectory. We're going to talk about a little bit with how Denmark is when it comes to international development and DPOD, and also the Global Disability Summit. But before we talk about all those exciting themes, a little bit of description for all the audience members who are viewing it and who have vision impairment. I am right now wearing a black jumper. I have a blue jacket on, and I have long curly hair, and I am wearing a blue tinted glasses. And yes, and we are recording this live from Oslo, and it's 19th of November, one day after Atlas celebrated its 40 years Jubilee celebrations. And Mette is here.
Yeah, I'm here, and I'm wearing a black dress. I had on a woolen sweater, which I'm really happy I brought, because Norway is like 6 or 7 degrees colder than Copenhagen, where I live. But I took it off because there's some good lighting in this studio, so I took it off. And then I'm wearing gold sneakers. Because I'm walking around the city both yesterday and today, so I had to have on flat shoes, but at least they're in gold.
So black dress with gold sneakers.
Yes,
that's a great combination. Wow. Okay, let's jump into this, Mette, because tell the audience a little bit about you and your biography. You're the head of international development at DPOD, which is one of the largest disabled people's organization in Denmark. Please tell us, who are you, where did you grow up, and what kind of education you took, and fill us up with that.
Okay, well, I'm going to be 44 very soon. I live in Copenhagen together with my husband and my 2 boys who are becoming teenagers, and it's a new phase of my life, of their life and my life. I have been occupied, or I think I've for ever since I was young, I have been kind of an explorer and eager to know what is beyond the borders of Denmark. So curious on the rest of the world, what about culture, about people, about nature. And this is how I also came on the path of international development, because I feel good when I'm in different countries, get to know that the world is bigger than Denmark. I mean, the global outlook of it all. And then also being abroad, meeting people with different living conditions. I think that combined with, with a strong passion for justice and, good living conditions for all and rights. I think that took me to the path of international development.
Wow. But the thing we just said, a couple of words which stuck out for me at least, were exploring, curious, and the world is bigger than Denmark. And the reason why I say that to you is because often when we are in Norway or Denmark, it feels like a bubble. It feels very, very beautiful. It feels something which is very open, but at the same time, not the rest of the world like. So tell me a little bit more about your curiosity and your exploratoriness, because you are right now in DPOD. So how did you reach there? And give a little bit of career trajectory points or junctures.
Sure. So when I was 16, a political youth party in Denmark had a kind of a seminar or a meeting about South Africa. And this was in April 94. So it was at the South African embassy in Denmark that this meeting was held about, what was happening in South Africa. And this was just so exciting. I was, like many people, really blown away with what was happening at that point of time in South Africa. And I ended up becoming a member of this political youth party.
Wow.
Because I thought it was, so interesting with the ambition to, try to change the world and be engaged in society. And being a member of this party gave me lots of fun experience, great contacts, and also an insight in how politics work. And when I was a student at university studying political science, an opportunity came up through this political youth party to go to Mozambique in southern eastern part of Africa to work with our sister party, with the political youth party in Mozambique, to work on democracy and how to build up the structure of a youth party, how to, organize yourself and so on. And this was such a great opportunity that I had to catch it. So when I was 23, I went to Mozambique. Had never been to Africa before. Sorry, I had been to Egypt. I had never been to that part of Africa before.
But that's MENA, right? Middle East and North Africa.
Completely different. So I spent a year there working with this political youth party, all these active, engaged young people.
Yes.
And I think, you know how it is in your young years. They're so transformative, right?
Yes.
I think I became really a strong feminist when I was working in Mozambique because the inequalities between genders were so obvious in a different way that I had been aware of in Denmark, where there's also inequalities. Inequalities between rich people in Mozambique, which at that point was one of the poorest countries in the world.
Absolutely.
And then, in the countryside or even in the big cities where people just had nothing at all. So I think that really those, and I ended up being there for 2 years in total, but that was such a transformative experience for me. And I have always been very engaged in having a human rights approach to development or to, improving conditions. It's not because of charity or, I feel so sorry for that little boy sitting there. It's about, it's about rights, access to education, access to representation, access, to health and so on. So that's, you asked about trajectory. I really think from being a member of a political party, ending up in Mozambique working with democracy and politics, that's really where it all started. And it's something that I have had with me for the last 20 years, working with different NGOs and so on. It's about rights, it's about politics and influencing and about inequalities.
Oh, absolutely. Like there's one thing in common between you and I, Mette, which I just realized 10 seconds ago. That is one of the first countries which I visited in Africa was, do you want to guess it?
Yeah. So we have a joint passion there. for Terra de Boa Gente.
It was Mozambique. It was Maputo. It was in 2019. I was still doing the PhD, and I just fell in love with the country. People are so warm and so polite, so soft spoken. But also, I absolutely agree with you that it's one of the poorest countries, and the inequalities are quite glaring in the country. And when it again circles back to the point which you mentioned, Mette, that the world is a bigger place. And when you come out from the bubble in Denmark or in Oslo, Norway, and you fly down to other parts of the globe, you see the diversity and you see the inequality. And then something sparks in you and says, yeah, I've got to do something. I've got to contribute to make this world a little better place. So it's fantastic that you're doing that, or you did that as part of the trajectory to come to DPOD, right?
Yeah, and I'll come back to DPOD, but it's not every day I talk about Mozambique. The organization I work with is not present in Mozambique. But talking to you about Mozambique, it's really, I have Mozambique, the Mozambican people in my heart. And it's actually a driver from deep in me. I can feel that talking to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Like I have a very soft corner for Maputo and Mozambique as well. Absolutely. So that's why I said that there's something in common, which you just found out, common passion. But let's take a little more steps ahead, because you were saying that you did that in early 2000s. And now we are currently sitting in 2021, 19th November. So what transpired between then, your rights advocacy related work in Mozambique, from there till today?
Yeah, so 5 years ago, the opportunity came to be part of Disabled People's Organizations Denmark, DPOD. To be international director, to be head of the international department. And I just felt it was a position that had my name on it, because it really combined a lot of my passions and in its core, working as a loyal servant, you can say, to the organizations of persons with disability. With such a strong group of organizations, of people who not only work in Denmark to improve their own living conditions, but are organizations that engage in development, in partnership with organizations in the global south. So DPOD is, in Norwegian terms, you can say it's a combination of FFO and Atlas organization, because it's the umbrella of 35 organizations of persons with disabilities. So we have, amongst those 35, it's everything from mental health to autism, the Danish Association of the Blind, epilepsy, dyslexia, all the different organizations in Denmark. They came together like 80 years ago.
Wow.
And formed this DPOD as the umbrella organization of the DPOs in Denmark. And from a perspective that if you join forces, you are stronger and you have a better chance of influencing the Ministry of Social Affairs, the Minister of Transportation, and so on and so on. And part of the work at DPOD is also the international engagement. Like Atlas Alliance, we have an agreement with the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs that gives us a good sum of money every year. That we can use on international development work. The majority of these money is being channeled directly to our member organizations. So that, for example, the Danish Association of the Blind, they have partners in Ghana, in Myanmar, in Mongolia with the blind associations there.
Wow.
And then they can have these partnerships with funding from the Disability Fund that DPOD is administrating. So one thing is the Disability Fund and the partnerships with the members. Another big part of it is our policy work, which I know we will come back to talking about, disability inclusion, the summit and so on. But that is in its core what we're doing.
Wow, the moment you were talking about Mongolia, my heart was thinking about Ulaanbaatar and perhaps in future, one of the places in the world where I'd like to travel would be that because that society is so fascinating.
Yeah, and they have a blind association there.
Wow,
which has been in partnership with the Danish Association of the Blind, working on organizational development, on strengthening their advocacy work, on being a good organization for their members in Mongolia.
Yes. No, it's so fascinating that you say that you and organizations, 35 organizations, came together, and you were talking about United We Stand in a way, and it's much easier to advocate for rights. It's much easier to lobby and push the agenda of disability inclusion, because otherwise the disability movement can sound or feel so fragmented.
True.
And so splintered.
True.
And then if you want to make nothing about us without us count, then there is strength when there are numbers involved.
Yeah.
So that's just great. And also when you mentioned this some moments ago about Africa, and you said that you wanted to go beyond the quote unquote charity understanding or sympathy understanding, or just focus on the quote unquote poverty aspect of the continent. Do you want to linger on that a little bit, of that thought, that how is that in context of the DPOD's work? Because often, for long, persons with disabilities have been considered as objects of charity and not as subjects of rights.
And it really pisses me off, I must say, because I think you take all agency out of people, out of a country, out of a continent. If it's about charity and feeling sorry for people, then you don't. Yeah, then you take all the agency out. So that's why I've been working 5 years with DPOD now, and like other. You're saying DPOs, right?
Yes.
We have really worked hard to change the terminology within our organization to OPDs.
OPDs, yeah.
So just to, but now because you're saying DPOs, I want to say DPOs as well to reflect what you're saying. But that's also how OPDs are working. Taking this the foundation that it's rights centered. We have the CRPD. It's not about feeling sorry for us. We are, and that is also how the international work is centered on. It's centered on nothing about us without us.
Absolutely.
But also human rights. Trying to, which is not an easy job, but trying to use the systems around the CRPD. The whole thing about being reviewed every 4th year in Geneva, trying to really apply these processes and use that as a strong advocacy tool, because the government of Ghana, for example, they shouldn't try to improve the life of persons with disabilities in Ghana because they feel sorry for them or because it hurts your eyes. It's because they're obligated to do it. And that is really, I think it gives so much more power, and it changes the dynamic in the conversation with both politicians and with the population. And trying to engage people. You don't want people to be engaged in this because they're feeling guilty.
Mm.
You want them to be engaged because they are, what's that word? Indignation? Is that an English word?
Yes. Righteous indignation.
Yeah. And that it's about, rights and justice, you can say.
Absolutely. It should cause a sense of outrage to individuals across the globe when till date many people with disabilities across the globe in the South are treated as objects of charity, but also in many cases second-class citizens or subhumans. And that's something which is very, very appalling because we're talking about CRPD. Just a quick note, CRPD is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And it was one of the most important, momentous moment for the disability rights movement. And I feel that we still have a lot of work to do. What are your thoughts about that, Mette? Like when it comes to getting the convention implemented in Ghana, in other parts of the globe?
I have been in this field. It sounds wrong. I've been part of the global disability movement for the last 5 years. Yeah. And I have actually been very positive and optimistic on a high global level, because I think the global disability movement has achieved a lot. The UN 2 years ago launched the Disability Inclusion Strategy, which is not, a strategy for just UNICEF or for the different. It came from the highest place, you can say, from Central, that states that all work should be disability inclusive, and there are mechanisms to monitor this and so on. So that was one thing. There was a resolution in the Security Council on inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian settings. There was the first Global Disability Summit in 2018. Yeah. And actually a lot of more funding from some bilateral donors to disability inclusion. And we had UK really standing in front also with this. And then came Norway. I think previous it was mostly Finland and Australia that were some of the champions. But then, it was spreading. Yeah. So it has really been, great joy to see these important and I think significant, negotiations and documents and so on. But this is so, and I think it has come following the CRPD, following the Sustainable Development Goals and Leave No One Behind. That's another really strong banner. Yeah, exactly. But of course, is that something that you can feel if you're a person with a disability in Mongolia or in Accra in Ghana? I'm not so sure. And that's where we as OPDs, DPOs, have a really strong task ahead of us of holding governments, multilateral institutions, and so on, accountable that all these beautiful documents, important documents, are actually being put into place.
No, absolutely. The proof of the pudding is in its eating. So one thing is to come up with an important document. One thing is to say that we will commit to, for instance, creating disability inclusive projects, programs, and policies. And the other thing is to actually implement it. Yeah. And as you said, when it comes to countries in the global South, we get the example of Ghana. We don't get a chance sometimes to implement the policies, to see the policies and programs be as disability inclusive as they should be.
Yeah, and I actually think it comes back a little bit to the discussion on charity, right? So should Ghana depend on a partner from Atlas Alliance or from Denmark, implementing a policy or providing the funds to implement the policy. No, it should be the government of Ghana who is taking this on, prioritizing in the budget or, negotiating with their donors somehow. It shouldn't be dependent on funding from NGOs. I think funding from NGOs and the partnerships are, beautiful, excellent. It contributes a lot, but it shouldn't be that in a district in the countryside in Ghana that they are dependent on direct money from, through a partnership with a Danish NGO.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then the partnership can help to make advocacy initiatives, talk to the how the local organization can go into dialogue with the local municipalities or district authorities and so on. I think that's the way, in an ideal world that it should actually come about. If it makes sense.
You're absolutely spot on, and you're hinting at a much more entrenched issue. Think about it in the global sense. Generally, the flow of knowledge, ideas, money, expertise, technical and whatnot, flows from north to south. And the moment that happens over long durations of time, then in the countries in the south, like you gave the example of Ghana, for instance, we might end up robbing the agency from the individuals, from the organizations, from even the government. We can make them quote unquote a bit dependent, for lack of better word, in this context, on the north. Look up to north, and so what we've got to do is what you were mentioning about partnership. It has to be with taking into account the power imbalances. How do we address that, and how do we have partnerships which are on equal footing with the organizations, with the governments, and making sure that the governments take it there? Those are the duty bearers.
Yeah, but you know what? This is really why I enjoy so much working with the Danish disability organizations and their partnerships, because it's almost like, maybe it's not maybe it's the wrong word, but it's almost like something magical is happening when the Danish Association of the Blind, when volunteers from that organization, persons who themselves are blind or partially sighted, they travel to Ghana. Let's stay in the same example, and they meet their counterparts. Because it's they have something in common. They meet each other in a completely different way than if it was a professional development aid worker from Denmark going to visit, a women's organization. Something magic can happen there as well, but there's really something quite unique in this peer-to-peer work that both the organizations of Atlas are doing and the organizations of DPOD is doing. It's very unique. Something strong also happens when a Danish man, paralyzed from the neck down, travels to Uganda, meets other people in a wheelchair, and he tells them that he has a law degree, worked his way through, is living in his own house, has a family, has children, and so on. And they meet him, and they're like, but how can you have a job and a law degree when you're paralyzed from the neck down? How is that even possible?
Yeah.
And the other way around as well, because I think when coming from these welfare countries, there's a support system for you.
Absolutely.
In a very strong way. And then you go to Mozambique or you go to Nepal, and you meet disability activists who are more powerful than anyone I've ever met, and who are struggling and who are who are strong in mobilizing, the rest of the disability movement, and really, has a strong driver to also um, uh, uh, strengthen the rights of her peers and the rest of the movement. And that I think gives a lot of inspiration to the Danish persons with disabilities traveling, meeting these, coming home with some, additional energy to their work at home.
No, absolutely. I would think that not just energy, but also cultural competence. And when there's this interchange of ideas, and when a Danish or Norwegian disabled person ends up traveling down south and finds that, wow, here are people who display resilience. Here are people who have a lot less resources, a lot less networks, but they still make good of the resources they have, and they are able to transform their lives. They are able to make something valuable out of it, in spite of the constraints. That is something which is so important to kind of underscore, accentuate, because that's where what you use the word magic happens, right? That. It becomes more an open-minded, inclusive dialogue with individuals who are sailing in the similar boat, perhaps in different waters.
True. Thank you for putting it so eloquently. It's true. That I think that really is what happens, and it gives DPOD, I think, a very strong legitimacy in our international work. Because we are not working, for someone, or again, it's really we are consisting of organizations of persons with disability, and then going into this work, and it's quite unique for the Nordic countries that the disability organizations have this international engagement and international partnerships.
Yes,
and it really contributes a lot, I think.
Now I will try to focus a little bit on the international development sector in general, and the role of disability inclusion. And I'll give the example from Norway, and then you could perhaps shed some light on what's happening in Denmark. So last year, Norway spent almost like $4 billion, which is a lot of money, on international development work, humanitarian work. It's one of the highest per capita spending globally. And I'm sure Denmark would be doing that, more or less a similar figure.
Más o menos.
Yes, exactly, más o menos. And out of this $4 billion, which is spent, a very, very tiny percent of it is disability inclusive. A fraction, like estimates say less than 3%. How is the situation in Denmark?
Now I have just been praising the work that DPOD's members and we are doing in the Global South. And I am highly appreciative of the support that the Danish government and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is channeling through us to do the disability-specific work. But the other part of the work, the one where disability is included in the more general, or the other parts of Danish development aid, is not strong at all. It's not a strong requirement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the development projects. It's not tracked, and there's no data on it, and it hasn't been the strongest priority of the ministers of development affairs ever.
Wow.
So and when we asked the ministry or the minister, so what about disability? DPOD is doing that. And as
of course,
we are, but that's the disability specific, working with the organizations of persons with disability.
Exactly.
What if it really needs to? I mean, that is less than a drop in the sea.
Yes.
So we are having working hard through our global policy program to influence, both our colleagues from the other organizations, the mainstream development organizations, but also, of course, politicians and the ministry and so on, really pushing for the Danish government to be part of the GLAD network, the Global Action on Disability Network, where Denmark is not yet a member.
Wow.
For some strange reason. And really trying to, point to the numbers. I mean, both, of course, the basic one we all know about, being 15% of the population, how many of those living in the global south, the inequalities, the studies that show that in humanitarian settings, it's the persons with the disability being left behind, and so on and so on, and going into coalitions with other organizations in Denmark who's also working on unfolding the leave no one behind concept. And what do we mean when we say no one should be left behind? Where's the data? How do we measure it? What are the action plans? So I think to sum up, we're doing great in the disability specific, including the Danish DPOs even in this work. But when it comes to disability inclusion and really having that as a priority, it's not at all where it should be.
Like when you told this story about how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would say disability inclusion isn't DPOD doing that? That sums it all. And why that sums it all is that often when you think about a conversation on disability, it stops in the corridors of the disabled people's organization of persons with disabilities, and this classic idea that that is something which is not part of the broader discussion, the broader agenda of development, or broader agenda of inclusion or diversity conversation, or equity conversation, or inclusion conversation. That is specifically linked to disabled people, their organization. Let them do that task. And if I could just add one thing, which is really very, very telling, that disability mainstreaming is so far behind when it comes to policies, projects, programs in North as well as in the South.
And you know what? That's why I'm really happy that Atlas Alliance is a close alliance partner, and the same being part of the global disability movement with International Disability Alliance as really a strong and brilliant influencer, and really strong advocate. Who has really pushed also, I think, the global progress, because it's inspiring, and it helps us in our work in Denmark that we can go to the Danish government or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and say, hey, have you seen what Norway has just done and their money together for inclusion? Or do you know that in Austria they are doing this and this? Or have you heard about the Security Council resolution and so on? So I think the global solidarity that exists in the disability movement is really, really valuable.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. And one key word or one key message is the thing which you said at the end: global solidarity. And when you are reflecting on the challenges of, for instance, making the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Denmark understand, or international development sector in Denmark understand, that disability mainstreaming is everybody's business, it reminds me that countries in the North are rich, are advanced, are industrialized, but still there are unresolved issues. And we still have to learn from each other. And the best way to learn is by engaging with the world, by seeing what are the best practices taking place in the United States, in the UK. You gave the example of Austria going down south in places like Ghana, Uganda, India, Bolivia, Mexico, and the rest, and saying that we don't have a panacea. We don't have a silver bullet to do it right, but we want to engage with the world, and we want to see that we could bring disability inclusion and disability mainstreaming, and in a solidarity global disability rights movement way.
But I think it's really at least in a Danish context, it's such a struggle for the different amongst the different organizations, because when we reach out then and say, oh well, disability should be mainstreamed, that should be included, the response can be from good colleagues from other organizations. Yeah, but we have so many cross-cutting issues already. This would just add another one. And our program people and the partners in the South, they already need to include gender. They need to include this. So it's really, there's enough on their plate already, which of course, but also, all of us civil society organizations, it's kind of like we each have our own theme, right?
Absolutely.
Indigenous people,
yes.
Gender,
yes.
Climate, religion, youth, seniors, sexual reproductive health rights, and so it's like we're competing with each other to have each of our theme highest on the agenda.
Yes.
Should more money be spent on education? Should it be spent on health? Should it be spent on, economic growth and so on? And that, I think that is the situation that we are in, that we are, and then that we are competing. And then it's the ones with the most innovative ideas, or who are, have the right connections, or who but yeah, and that's, I think it's just the response that we can hear from both other organizations, but also from the ministry, that there's so many target groups to be included, and I don't really know how to solve this, and I'm speaking a bit beyond my own organization and our own topic here. And I was just yesterday, when we had the celebration and celebrating the great advances that disability has experienced in international development work here in Norway. If I was an organization in Norway working with indigenous people's rights or something, I would be so annoyed with the disability movement. No, sorry to bring this to the table, but I think it's, if you have this, what do you think about that? I know you're the one asking the questions, but I really.
No, I think you're spot on with a lot of the analysis when it comes to, competing interests, competing, like this whole scramble for resources. Resources are limited. We live in a finite world with a lot of constraints, and we have a brief attention span often as individuals, as organizations, and as governments, and prioritization kind of could be a challenge. But what I would say is something like this, that yesterday when we were having the celebration and there was this panel discussion about the Global Disability Summit, and when I was summarizing the discussion in the end, I said something to this effect. Disability is part of human condition. Persons with disabilities are part of human diversity. Doesn't matter your race, gender, class, sexual orientation, your status as indigenous person or not, which part of the globe you belong, what kind of linguistic proclivities you have or not, there is a chance that you can become disabled out of injuries, out of accidents, out of genes, out of natural disasters, out of war, out of conflict, out of aging. In one of the opinion pieces, I said something to this effect, that if you are lucky enough to live long enough, then there's a high chance that you will check into hotel disability.
True.
So if we look at disability from that angle, if you look at it as a much more ubiquitous, universalizing concept, then we are going beyond the interest groups, or for instance, indigenous or gender or climate. It becomes part of a cross-cutting discussion. We are talking in a much more inclusive, much more human rights oriented, and much more universalizing tone. And we say to people with absolute humility, you give the example of the person who was from Denmark, who was paralyzed from neck down. Here is a person, I'm assuming, is Danish, is white, belongs to a rich country,
Male, yeah.
male, but still has a disability. And all those categories, rich, male, privileged, industrialized country, those are powerful indicators. Those are the privilege hierarchy, and that person is on the top in a way. If you think about a hierarchy of privilege, but still that person has a disability. So what that experience tells me is that when that person goes to Uganda, goes to Ghana, goes to other parts, Mongolia and other parts of the globe, it becomes more natural. It becomes a much more pleasant phenomena to say, okay, that person out there is disabled. I'm disabled. It's a much more universal phenomenon. Can we work together? Can we learn from each other? Can we fight together?
I completely agree. And I think that can move us to, not to take on your role as the host, but I think that can actually move us into the Global Disability Summit.
Absolutely.
Because I think that we have an opportunity at the Global Disability Summit to widen the horizon for the people involved, or the people who are not involved yet, in what is it that we who are within the disability movement, what is it we are working with? Why is this important? Why is this not just a disability issue, a specific or singled out issue? Why is it, as you're so brilliantly saying it, a human condition that should be naturally included in all aspects of, whether it's foreign policy, development policy, health issues, or whatever. It's really part of it all.
Absolutely. So that's a perfect segue, right? So we are talking about 86 days away from the Global Disability Summit.
Yeah.
Norway is going to host this digitally 14th to 17th of February. And there are different components to it. There is a component on Youth Summit on 14th, 15th has Civil Society Day, and 16th and 17th has high-level meetings. What, in your understanding, has been happening in Denmark in particular when it comes to the Global Disability Summit? I would like to pick your brain on that. And also, I know that you are the vice chair for International Disability and Development Consortium.
Yeah.
What's happening in that space and the Global Disability Summit? We will reflect.
Yeah, I think there are maybe two tracks on this. The one thing is both within DPOD and IDDC is about mobilization, disseminating the knowledge that this summit is coming up. When we have our partners in the South, disseminate it to them if they haven't heard about it. Atlas Alliance has made a toolkit on advocacy for the Global Disability Summit to share that, so that we are all engaged somehow and really spreading the word and have the right capacity to enter into this and understand what is it even about? What is the different from a commitment that you make at a summit from the CRPD recommendations that you can get as a national country who has signed the CRPD? But so the one thing is really, I think, the mobilization of, all organizations of persons with disability around the world. And then the other track is the whole policy influencing track to make sure that there's high representation from the Danish government and Ministry of Foreign Affairs to share and to share the need, to share with the ministry the possibility of making commitments, how they could look like.
Yes.
So I think that's really getting a really high attendance and also trying to get the more mainstream NGOs that are not involved in disability to pick an interest in this.
Absolutely. No, this is a great point that you're saying, that the mainstream organizations which have little interest, or let's say they have interest, but they have so much on their plate that they have not thought about disability in an inclusive way, in a mainstreaming way, should become more involved with the Global Disability Summit. If there's one specific outcome which you would envision to come out of Global Disability Summit as an individual, as a representative of DPO, what would that be?
That would be for more and for stronger commitment from the Danish government and Ministry of Foreign Affairs to disability inclusion, to really get that insight in, how important it is, how crucial it is, and that if we really mean that no one should be left behind, this is really critical.
And is there any specific part of disability inclusion which you burn for instance, education, or you mentioned about that you being a feminist, which you would want to change, or you want the outcome to be positive? What would that be?
I know that the International Disability Alliance has started to use the concept also about underrepresented groups. And I think there is a need for us within the disability movement to also talk about leave no one behind. Do we have all the different disability groups, you can say, highly engaged in this? Who is being left behind within the disability movement? What about, mental health issues? When you are lucky enough to attend a UN meeting in New York, who are the representatives around? Who are the strong, with a long history and tradition and so on? So I think there's something about that we also, look within ourselves to think about, is there anything we should do to be more inclusive and to talk about underrepresented groups and make sure that I'm not saying it's easy to have subtitles or to have, accessible entries and to have what's the word? Visual,
audio description.
Oh, yes, thank you. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's very tangible. How do we make meetings, workplaces, big conferences where it's easy to participate? If you have a diagnosis of some mental health issues, or if you are deaf, blind, or I think there's some work for us to be done if we should be a little bit self-critical.
Oh, I love this fact that you are putting this out, the idea that we should be a little self-critical, we should be a little humble, we should look at as a movement, disability rights movement, and say which are the voices that are getting sidelined, marginalized, and excluded. And how could we ensure that these voices get represented? Because when we say nothing about us, without us, this us is a broad coalition. It has, as you mentioned, about some cases of, say, for instance, mental health, invisible impairments, is something which is perhaps not given attention sufficiently in countries, many countries. It's not even recognized. It's not being acknowledged.
Exactly.
That these conditions do exist. And the same, for instance, if you are deaf, blind, how can we make sure that we include you in the conversation when there's a conversation happening about rights, so that it's not the quote unquote usual suspects talking to the quote unquote choir who already knows the score.
Yeah, if you want to be on the high moral grounds, you need to also have your own house in order. And I think that would be my answer to your question about if there's anything I'm particularly not concerned about, but really following closely and also thinking about within the organization that I'm representing here today. What are we doing to make sure that no one is left behind?
Absolutely. Oh, that was a great rhetorical question. What are we doing? That when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to mainstreaming, when it comes to voicing the perspective, and when it comes to operationalizing representation matters or nothing about us without us. That is just phenomenal. One last thing now, before we leave. Is there something you would want to tell the audience which you have not told anybody before? Because from what I gathered, you traveled yesterday from Denmark to Norway early morning. Yeah, something which could be interesting for all the audience to know about Mette Møller Kristensen, which they don't know.
So I think I said in the beginning that my children are really getting older and they don't need me as much, or they need me in a different way. So I was thinking, okay, what should I do with that additional time I actually have at hand? And I think the easy solution, or what many people would end up doing, is just to work some more. And I love my job. I think, it's important and so on.
Yes.
But you also have to be a whole person. You need to have, So this year in August, I started singing in a choir, which is something I have never done before. And it's actually a choir with the name, I think directly translated, it would be something like the choir of fools. Not fools, but the people who can't sing.
Yeah, the ship. It reminds me of this ship of fools idea from Greece. Yeah, but yeah.
So it's actually no one thinks they're good in singing, but we can sing, or maybe we just cannot hear it.
Really?
But it's wonderful. Once a week, every Wednesday night, I join this choir.
Yes.
And we have this. You cannot be mad and sing at the same time, right? They're big smiles and just, it's full of joy and brings energy, because I think for, all of us who are engaged in trying to, improve the world, or, and really are met with, some tough life stories and, you could spend your, all your hours awake, doing this. But you need to have some things in your life that really brings you joy, give you energy, and, makes you a better person, so that you can, so that you can perform in the best way.
Absolutely. When are you going to perform sometime in Denmark with your choir?
No,
practice?
Because I think that's just it. It's not about performing. I think it's really, I don't know if I have an age where I can give life advice, but I think
I'm
43, but I'm going to say it now. I think it's important that you have some things in your life where it's not about being good or performing, but where it's just about, having fun and being present. So this is not about giving big concerts or really, making it sound wonderful. It's about just, being present and having fun.
Wow. On that amazing note, on being present, having fun, and I think we should say that this was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gaga.
For this amazing talk. Mette Møller Kristensen. If you want to check out her work and DPOD, go to the websites. Thank you so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I hope that you found this conversation insightful, engaging, enlightening, and a little bit entertaining. And I hope you get a chance to follow the next episodes.